Welcome to the Sage Solutions Podcast, where we talk about all things personal growth, personal development, and becoming your best self. My name is David Sage, and I'm a self-worth and confidence coach with Sage Coaching Solutions.
On today's episode, we will be discussing curiosity and critical thinking.
There's a reason that this is one of my 5 core fundamentals, and the 4th one in the series. Without this fundamental, this podcast probably wouldn't exist. The whole point of the podcast is for people to learn and grow and improve themselves. And in order to do that, you have to approach life with some curiosity. If you're not going to have any curiosity, then this podcast isn't going to do much for you.
That's a good point. In the education realm, we are all about cultivating a mindset of curiosity in our students, because without that curiosity, they don't develop a love of learning. I would argue that what makes learning interesting in the first place is the approach of being open to and wanting to know more.
Yeah, I mean, curiosity is a perspective that we take. It's being open and wanting to learn and being inquisitive. Curiosity is the driving force of learning. If you're not curious, then you're passively learning a little bit just by going through life. But if you're curious, you're actively learning from every situation and taking in that much more life experiences and information and internalizing it more. Like you said, for students, that helps grow a love of learning.
Yes, and I think it's important to note here that a love of learning is not just for students or kids. Actively learning is something everyone should do, no matter how removed you are from a classroom setting. Anything I say in the context of education applies to educating ourselves, too. Everyone would benefit from developing a love of learning. But it can't just end there with curiosity, right?
No, and that's why the core fundamental is curiosity and critical thinking. If you're only curious and you're not using any critical thinking, you're going to accept all of the information that you get, including everything that you see on TV, everything that you read on the internet, and everything that anyone ever tells you. As a result, you're going to end up believing a lot of things that aren't true, or just forming ideas and opinions that don't work or aren't good ways of doing things because you didn't critically evaluate them using critical thinking with your curiosity. But if you're just doing critical evaluation and not using curiosity, you're just going to basically be super skeptical and shut everything down. It's about the balance. It's about finding the shades of gray.
But before we get into it, our goal with this podcast is to share free, helpful tools with you and anyone you know who is looking to improve their life. So take action, subscribe, and share this podcast with them.
So I think we're going to break this podcast down into 2 different parts. We're going to focus on cultivating curiosity, what that means, different ways to do it, and why it's so important for the first half. And for the second half, we're going to talk about how you then apply critical thinking to make sure that you are analyzing, evaluating, and coming up with rational conclusions, which will help you sort through all of the information that you're taking in with this curious mindset, and therefore guide your beliefs and actions.
So let's dive in. The Oxford Dictionary's definition of curiosity is a strong desire to know or learn something. That makes it sound so simple, but there's so much more to it.
In some ways, it kind of is that simple, because the definition is very clear and concise and applicable in many different situations. But it's really about finding how to apply it in each different situation and understanding how to cultivate this perspective in many different areas of our lives. And that, along with the critical thinking part, are what make it more complex. So how do we cultivate this approach of curiosity, this mindset? Start by taking any situation that you're in and asking yourself, what can I learn from this situation? What can I learn from this person? What can I learn from this book or article or podcast? It goes on and on and on to just about any situation that you could be in. But what does curiosity look like? It looks like listening. It looks like reading things. It looks like asking questions. It's having a growth mindset. It's being a lifelong learner and seeing yourself as one. And it's also staying open to new ideas, rethinking things when you get new information, and having some intellectual humility.
We talk about growth mindset a lot in schools. Growth mindset is the belief that a person's abilities can be developed through effort, learning, and persistence. It's a way of thinking about challenges and setbacks that focuses on improvement and growth, rather than being stuck in a fixed mindset. When you're faced with a challenge or a problem, it's easy to get stuck in thinking, I can't, I'll never do this, I won't, this is always going to be hard, getting really stuck in those extremes.
Which is a very black and white way of viewing it.
Right. So to help kids break out of that fixed mindset, we talk a lot about the power of yet. When you add the word yet onto a fixed mindset way of thinking, it opens yourself up to the possibilities of being able to get there in time or with effort. So for example, if you're thinking, I can't do this, when you add yet onto the end there, I can't do this yet, suddenly that opens your brain up to the idea of, oh, well, if I practice more, then I'll be able to do it. If I don't give up and I keep trying, then I'll be able to do it. If I ask for help or I work with somebody else and we do it together, then I'll be able to do it. And you just have a more flexible way of reasoning and figuring out possibilities that you wouldn't otherwise see if you're stuck in that fixed mindset.
Right. You're not just who you were in the past. You're not just who you are right now, but you're also who you will become. And you will know many things that you didn't know before if you stay open and be curious. Having a growth mindset is the belief that you can do that. In fact, if you remember from our 6 human needs episode, growth is one of our 6 human needs, and learning is a great way to meet it. Once again, as Tony Robbins says, if you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not learning, you're losing.
Right, which is why it's so important to take a stance of a growth mindset, because when you do, learning becomes far less daunting and more exciting and interesting, and you develop a desire to become a lifelong learner.
Being a lifelong learner means being someone who continues to learn and develop new skills and knowledge throughout their life, both for personal and professional reasons. Lifelong learning can involve both formal and informal learning, and requires you to keep learning well after formal education. Curiosity is the trait that gives children that childlike wonder that people are usually in awe of. When the littlest things and learning about them make them excited about things that we take for granted, that is a pure mindset of curiosity. So being a lifelong learner is trying to capture some of that. Take that stance of wonder towards the little things in our life, in addition to the big things, and constantly be learning and growing. You can have both wisdom and wonder. Let complexity create awe as well. A big part of this is trying not to get set in your ways. Nobody can learn everything, which means that everyone can always learn. Which is why, regardless of what generation or age you are, you always have more things to learn. New things are being figured out all of the time. And regardless of the generation that you're a part of, whether you are Gen Z or a baby boomer, you can learn things from life and from other generations. Stay open. See yourself as young and open-minded. Now, your biological age is your biological age, but your mental age is much more flexible. Muhammad Ali said, "Age is whatever you think it is. You are as old as you think you are." When people say age is just a number, this is what they're talking about. But the flip side is that the older you are, if you're taking life with the mindset of being a lifelong learner, having that be a part of your identity, you are also accumulating wisdom. The older you get, the more you get the best of both worlds. If you keep the wonder and gain the wisdom.
That's really powerful because you're going to gain wisdom either way as you live more life. But you're definitely going to gain more wisdom if you approach life with curiosity. However, I love that you pointed out that it has to be an active choice to hang on to that wonder of childhood in order to benefit from the best of both worlds, both wisdom and wonder.
Now, when we're talking about this childlike wonder, you can't really do it if you're not staying open-minded. Part of how children do it is that they just take the world as it is at first. They give themselves that time to be present and in the moment, kind of like we talked about in the last episode, where you're just being in the moment, you're being present, and you're just being curious about everything going on around you without that initial judgment. It's staying open to new ideas and not giving them snap judgments or shutting things down right away. Obviously, we'll talk about the part where you critically think about them, but first, you have to stay open. And part of staying open is a willingness to hear new information, a willingness to take in that information, and a willingness to rethink the things that we believe and the things that we may think we know, or that we may actually know. And in order to truly stay open to new information, to new ideas, you need to have what's called intellectual humility.
I haven't heard that term before. What is intellectual humility?
Intellectual humility is the ability to recognize the limits of your own knowledge, of your beliefs, and to be open to reconsidering and expanding them. It's a metacognitive process. Metacognition is thinking about thinking that involves acknowledging one's fallibility and being willing to embrace uncertainty. But what does that really mean? What it means is having humility surrounding the way that you think, surrounding what you know, surrounding your beliefs, things that you've heard, surrounding your ability to think about things or the way that you think about things. It's taking your ego out of your thinking. It's not getting defensive. It's not protecting. It's not having to be right. It's about honestly and openly just having the humility to want to know the truth. It's also a willingness to acknowledge your biases, my biases, our biases, including the universal cognitive biases.
Okay, that's a lot. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, intellectual humility is essentially walking through life with the underlying mindset that the way that I think and what I know or think I know is flexible. It's potentially going to change with new information. It doesn't make me better than anybody else or worse than anybody else.
It makes you human. And as a human, you're right. No matter how much you learn, no matter how much you grow, no matter how smart you are not better than anyone else. You are not. And the sooner that people accept the humility that acting like you're better than other people is a universally unbeneficial trait, whether it be in your mind or in your life, the sooner you will get the freedom to treat other people better, to be more open-minded to different things, to be more open-minded to other people. In order to have intellectual humility, you have to tamper down your ego. It's better to define your identity in terms of values and not opinions. In order to have intellectual humility, you have to be open to hearing what you don't want to hear. You have to be open to seeking out information that goes against your current view. Because arrogance is a rubber shield that all of your life experience bounces off of. It's actually a quote by Adam Grant in his book, Think Again. Another quote by somebody I respect a lot is, "Give yourself the grace to change your mind," by Gary Vaynerchuk in his podcast, The Gary V Audio Experience. Part of intellectual humility is accepting that being wrong is a good thing. If you find out you were wrong, you just learn something. Finding out that there's things that you don't know is also a good thing. It means there's extra room for learning and growing. It's having the humility to understand finding out that you don't know things is a good thing, that there is always more to learn.
That reminds me of another thing we talk about a lot in education. We refer to the word fail as an acronym to mean first attempt in learning. Because truly, when you fail, it's just your first try and you learn a lot from it to be able to move forward. And I think that fits really well with intellectual humility.
That is such a good point. Embrace failure. It is when you learn the most. Fail, then iterate, and try again. The willingness to fail is one of the truest expressions of intellectual humility. It's being okay with not always being right, with not always being successful, with not always being seen as the smartest person in the room. It's not pretending that you know things just to look smarter. It's being willing to try, to do. That's why I say action is success, and outcomes are just learning. Positive outcomes are just evidence of what you did right that you can use for the future. Negative outcomes, often called failure, are where you make the most progress and learn the most. One of my favorite quotes of all time is actually by Sir Isaac Newton. He said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." What he means is that he is not this absolute genius. The only reason he made the progress that he did was by learning from the past, by learning from other brilliant people, by standing on the shoulders of the many people who advanced knowledge before him to come to the new conclusions that he did. He couldn't have done it without them, which is why he stands on the shoulders of giants. It takes intellectual humility to not take credit for everything and to give credit for all of the things that you've learned that didn't originally come from you. Which is why I love that saying, "I stand on the shoulders of giants." What it means is it's not all about you. It's like the difference between height and elevation. Most people are super concerned with their own height, intellectually speaking, as opposed to how high they can actually get by using the elevation, by standing on the shoulders of giants. It's about having that humility instead of having it have to all be about you.
Okay, so today I learned that intellectual humility is something I really value in myself and others. I just didn't have the language to know that's what it was. So now it's really cool being able to name intellectual humility as something I value.
Yeah, when I first stumbled upon this concept and how many different areas that it bled into and had its roots into, I was really excited that this was something that was established and people were thinking about.
Yeah, I would love for this concept to be more actively practiced and valued. But people aren't perfect. Not everybody in our lives are always going to have a ton of intellectual humility. And personally, I get frustrated when someone shuts down my thinking right away because they hold their opinion or way of thinking so firmly that they're closed off to any new information and think their way is the only way or better than any other way. And hey, I get stuck in this sometimes too. So in those frustrating moments, I try to practice what Mom always says to us, which is approach them with curiosity and not judgment. So essentially, I'm trying to take a mindful approach with other people, just like you talked about in last week's episode.
Mindfulness is a great perspective to take when you're dealing with other people. It keeps you in the moment. It keeps you from judging people. And if we're talking about it from a practical perspective, you don't control other people. Sometimes people might be frustrating. But when you approach from curiosity and non-judgment with an open mind where you're just trying to learn about them or their motivations or why or understand their day and you're actively listening, it's going to put you in a much better place to understand them in that interaction. Also, focus on your locus of control. You can't control them, so don't let them. Just let it go, and it'll be that much more freeing. What you can control is the way that you're presenting yourself in interactions with other people. You can also control whether you're approaching them with curiosity, whether you're judging them, your intentions in that interaction, and your perspectives surrounding it.
I totally agree. In any interaction I have with people, I always find it very helpful to approach with a mental curiosity that starts with why. But sometimes I get so caught up with trying to be aware of all of those pieces that are within my control when I'm interacting with people that I lose sight of being mindful and actively listening to what they're trying to say to me.
Which is okay. We all do this. It's hard to constantly be active listening. We're human. I know I say that a lot, but it's true. There's going to be times where you're in your own head, where you're feeling self-conscious, where you feel like you just screwed something up. It's not always going to be perfect. But the more that you can try and actively listen, the more that you listen in general, the better your interactions with other people will go. And one of the best ways to implement active listening is, of course, approaching from curiosity and not judging, but using reflective listening, which is where you are both present and in the moment, and then when the person is done, you are actively trying to remember enough that you can reflect back to them the points that they just made to make sure that you understood it clearly. This serves two purposes. It forces you to be a more active listener, and it helps you use some intellectual humility to see if you misunderstood parts of it. It helps you not miscommunicate. It helps you understand other people's perspectives, and it helps you connect with others more. You make them feel heard, you make them feel good, and you learn more in the process.
My current supervisor is actually really skilled at this. To give you an example of what this looks like or sounds like within the context of a conversation, when he's listening to me or someone else, he'll often pause, say, if I'm understanding you correctly, summarize what he heard or understood that we said, and then check in at the end, like, is that what you were trying to say? And that always makes me feel really heard and gives me an opportunity to clarify if what I was trying to communicate was interpreted in the way I had intended it to be.
Exactly. Listening is a skill. Active listening and reflective listening are refined versions of that skill. It sounds like your supervisor has spent a lot of time building and honing that skill. And just like everything else, you have to build it like a muscle. You have to actively and consciously listen, be present, take it all in.
In a recent conversation I had with someone, they tried to warn me with a saying we've all heard a million times, which is, oh, be careful, curiosity killed the cat. And when they said that, they meant curiosity can be very dangerous, right? Because we always envision the cat being curious about things that bring it harm, like being curious about how a wire might taste and chewing through a live wire, or being curious about something they see in the street and getting hit by a car. It's meant to point out the negative, unhelpful, or even harmful consequences of being too curious. Or in the case of the cat, even fatal. But as I was thinking of this, I thought that's kind of a dumb saying because curiosity in and of itself is not a negative thing. And then I reflected on it some more, and I realized that maybe we've been interpreting the lesson of that saying wrong. Curiosity isn't bad. However, when we're only approaching from curiosity and not pairing it with critical thought before we take action on our curiosity, that's when we can have very negative, unhelpful, or harmful consequences.
Or taking in information that is blatantly false because we didn't really think it through can cause us to make bad, poor, and misinformed decisions, while curiosity is the starting point. And arguably the most important part, because without it, you won't be taking in information and being curious enough to have things to critical think about. If you're not thinking critically, as Anna just said, it can cause huge problems in your life. Join us next week as we break down how you apply critical thinking to your curiosity. It's important to remember the information I provide in this podcast is not individualized. It's generally beneficial and helpful, but it isn't specific to your situation. Everyone should look at their own situation and understand how these concepts apply to their own life. Now, if you are looking for personalized advice and are interested in individualized coaching, feel free to reach out to me at sagecoachingsolutions@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to the Sage Solutions Podcast. Your time is valuable, and I'm so glad you continue to choose to learn and grow here with me. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more sage advice. One last thing. The legal language. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. No coaching-client relationship is formed. It is not intended as a substitute for the personalized advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.